It's a really odd part for that song to stop at. So I wanted to go ahead and start with a screencast kind of explaining some things that we needed to get to in class, but we didn't have the time to do so. For your homework, I want you guys, with your partners, to create leveled questions for chapters 1 through 4. In the presentation, the directions are there. You're only creating level 1 questions. However, in this presentation, I'm going to go over some information of how to actually read the novel, and then we're going to look at leveled questions, and I'll go ahead and show you using a document for chapter 1 how I would go about creating leveled questions if I were a student. So let's go ahead and get started. So the very first thing that we want to focus on is, how do you read Lord of the Flies? Well, let's go ahead and consider the author. So the interesting thing about William Golding is you can see here in the orange that he actually served in World War II for the Royal Navy. And he participated in the invasion of Normandy. And clearly in Lord of the Flies, you have this echo that parallels the war. And if you think about it, and when we talk author's purpose, it's almost as if he may be making a commentary on the state of war. And one of the reasons why William Golding could have possibly have philosophized on that is he probably was in one of the most dangerous battles of the entire war. I mean, clearly in World War II, they were all dangerous, but if you study warfare from World War II, you still have a lot of face-to-face combat. And, you know, for the Americans and for the British, they would have been on, you know, flat boats where it would have they would have hit the sand, the beach, and the end of the boat would have opened and they would have ran off. And there were a number of people who wouldn't have even made it to the shore. It was really ugly. It was really scary. And the fact is, even if you're able to kind of, work through the horror of having to live with that, it's something that stays with you. And with that being said, let's go ahead and check out this video of William Golding. If I can find my little mouse. There it is.
My name's William Golding, and I wrote this book, Lord of the Flies, in, I think it was either 1953 or 1954. There have been a great many things said about...
I'm going to pause it. So listen, World War II ended around this time. This is kind of like preceding the Korean War, because we had World War II, and then in the 50s we went into the Korean War. In the 60s we went into Vietnam. And, these are generations of people that would have been drafted. They wouldn't have necessarily, raised their right hand to join the military. And so, their experience, especially with the type of war they were dealing with, would have, really been something that William Golding probably would have wanted to share with those who would not have experienced it.
How it came to be written, and I don't know whether any of them are true or not. As far as I'm concerned, it happened because one day I was sitting one side of the fireplace and my wife was sitting the other, and I suddenly said to her, wouldn't it be a good idea to write a story about some boys on an island showing how they would really behave? Being boys and not little saints as they usually are in children's books. And she said, that's a first-class idea, you write it. So I went ahead and wrote it. When girls say to me, and very reasonably, why isn't it a bunch of girls, and why did you write this about a bunch of boys? Well, my reply is, I was once a little boy, I have been a brother, I have been a father, I am going to be a grandfather, I have never been a sister, or a mother, or a grandmother, so this is why I wrote it really about little boys. That's one answer. Another answer is, of course, to say that if you, as it were, scale down human beings scale down society, if you land with a group of little boys, they are more like scaled down society than a group of little girls would be. Don't ask me why, and this is a terrible thing to say because I'm going to be chased from hell to breakfast by all the women who talk about equality. This is nothing to do with equality at all. I mean, I think women are foolish to pretend they're equal to men. They're far superior and always have been. But one thing you cannot do with them is take a bunch of them and boil them down, so to speak, into a set of little girls who would then become a kind of image of civilization, of society. That's another reason why they were little boys. The other thing is, why aren't they little boys and little girls? Well, if they'd been little boys and little girls, we being who we are, sex would have raised its lovely head. And I didn't want this book to be about sex. I mean, sex is too trivial a thing to get in with a story like this, which was about the problem of evil and the problem of how people are to live together in society, not just as lovers or man and wife.
All right. So that's really interesting. All right. So how would you read this? So there are different ways that you can read, and there's two different approaches. And so you're interpreting kind of, you have to keep in mind William Golding in the back of your head. He is not the narrator, so don't confuse him with the narrator because he has this disembodied third-person narrator, which, although he is the author, the two are separate. But, you have the mood that's created because of the author's, attitude towards the topic that they're writing about. And so even though the narrator and the author are separate people, even if the author writes the book, you have to consider kind of the background of the author to understand what he puts into the narrator and the characters. So events and characters. So you have a psychological approach. Now you have the id, the ego, and the superego. I am going to link this article for those of you who would like to read more about it. It's really good. It goes into depth. Your id is like your primal part of your being. So it's just, your Maslow, your instincts, like, getting what you need, safety, survival, all of that. Your ego is your reality. It's everything you want, and it's actually kind of like the distant cousin of the id, but you don't, go out and get everything that you want because you have your superego, which is shaped by society that, forces you to control your ego. And then your superego is, the laws that you conform to because of the group that you're raised within. And so I'll link this and you guys can check that out if you'd like to read a little more about that. So the id is the dark, inaccessible part of our personality. And it's that little part of our being that we don't know much about. It's our drives, impulses, immediate satisfaction. If you think of, the newborn child, like they don't reason, all they know is, hunger and thirst and comfort. They don't know societal conventions. It's just instincts and attention. The id has not learned judgment, good, evil, morality, because remember, you learn that as you grow up in the civilization where you do. But all that the id is about is survival and like 100%, all about you. Now, your ego is in an attempt to mediate between id and reality. It is often obliged to cloak the unconscious demands of the id. Your ego really has a lot in common with your id, but it's controlled more because you're a little more aware of right and wrong. That doesn't mean you follow it. So, ego is judgment, tolerance, reality testing, control, planning, defense, synthesis of information, intellectual functioning, and memory. Obviously, not like a newborn child that, has learned all of these things. Ego, you've learned, how to maneuver your world and how to play the game. The ego's main function is to appease the id, and that's within a way that agrees with the reality of the real world. And, in the long run will benefit that person. But in addition, although satisfying the id, you have to kind of, negotiate and reconcile with the superego. And the superego is the special psychical agent which performs the task of seeing that narcissistic satisfaction from the ego ideal is ensured, what we call our conscience. So this is like the moral part of your being. So your superego aims for perfection, punishes misbehavior with guilt. This is the part of us that's super hard on ourselves when we feel like we're not doing something right. The best way to describe this is when a child is young and they see their parents as superhuman and perfect. At that point, parents are hiding their imperfection because they want to teach their, kids the norms of society and right or wrong. But that superego represents that perfection of societal norms and traditions, which is, really interesting because if you look at any major religion and you think of the idea of a mortal, mortals can't, attain, perfection unless you look at Buddhism. That's another story. So the political approach. So you have these questions. So when you think of the boys, they are there on that island. What is their appeal to authority? So asking, do you think people need authority? Do you think people want authority? What is the purpose of authority? What should the purpose of authority be? The book examines the ways that the boys work through these issues regarding authority. So what's funny is at first they're super excited, to not have authority, the majority of the boys, right? Except for Piggy. However, the interesting part of it is that as it goes on, they desire roles. I read once that if you had students make rules in your class, their rules would be harder than what you would come up with because we desire roles, in essence. Power. So how do people, when put in a position, respond to power? And, who deserves it? What does power do to people? How much power should people have? Is there too much? Is there too little? And what do you do when someone reacts poorly to having power? And so the book, in addition to, the common idea of authority, it examines how the boys kind of react to the issue of power. Now, you can use both of these approaches. There is an id, a superego, and an ego, and you want to take this idea and kind of examine the characters because you may see it there, or the idea of authority and power, and how do the characters represent that or react to that? How do they respond to those questions in the slides before? So with that being said, that is all for this presentation. Yes. Let's go ahead and take a look at leveled questions. So you have 3 types of leveled questions, and I will link this. I'm not sure if I'd already linked it. So level 1 is literal, factual. You can put your finger on the text. So if you had to draw a picture, it would be like a finger pointing to a book. And these are explicit. They're the facts. And you should be able to find a page, find a line that answers the question. It's right there in front of you. Level 2 is inferential. This is interpretive. And so basically, it's where you read between the lines and you have subtext. So these are things that are implied. So you have to analyze and interpret specific parts. So, essentially you can take 2, explicit items that are stated and come up with a theory that's inferential based on them. A good answer will probably lead to an identification of the significant patterns in the text. The patterns are what is not always, very obvious. And so that's what level 2 is. Level 3 is thematic. This is experiential, connecting, abstract. You can't put your answer on the text because you're kind of extending. It's moving beyond the text. So think theme. These questions provoke discussion of an abstract idea or issue. In addition to evidence from the text, you may bring your own personal experience into the discussion if it has a discussion and a bearing to the abstract idea or issue. So this is, this is inferences subtext. This is moving beyond and taking the text to connect to things that are outside of the text. So with that being said, let's go ahead and go into the reading. So bear with my crazy little reading here. So you begin with Ralph, and it doesn't tell you about anything that happened. When you first begin, reading this, it's really interesting because you automatically think that, is it boys exploring or playing? I mean, if you read the first paragraph, that's what you'd kind of assume. It doesn't tell you anything about the plane crash. And so you have the scar, and this is referring to the actual, crash itself. And you have another voice, and when you get the idea of Piggy, if you look at the way that he's described, you have Ralph being described as fair, and then, Piggy, obviously, like his physical appearance, says a lot about kind of what William Golding was going for. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, before a level 1, a level 2 question that you could actually write in this area is, Ralph being described as fair and Piggy as not very becoming, to put it lightly, represents their initial view of the situation. Now, when you get into Ralph being chosen as the leader and Piggy not being chosen, look at Ralph. Ralph at the very beginning, he's really, connected to Jack. They seem like pretty good friends. And he's not always, Piggy sees reality where Jack does not. And if you think about it, do the boys represent two different views of reality in the situation they are in? So you would have to take the descriptions to answer that. And you could go through and you can say, well, look at the way that Ralph is described and look at the way that Piggy is described. And this is Ralph's attitude towards the situation and this is Piggy's attitude towards the situation. So by William Golding making Piggy unbecoming, and he has asthma, he's sickly, he's overweight, he's not as attractive. And his view of the situation is also not as attractive. When you think of a bunch of kids, a bunch of boys on this island, if this wasn't a plane crash, this is like prime time, fort making, having fun time. And, Ralph is pretty amazed. If you look at his descriptions, when he sees the conch. And let's go ahead and, go to that part. So, before we do, let's look at a level 1 question. So when you look, a level 1 question could be, how did the boys get there? I could put my finger on the answer. They were dropped off from a plane. Most likely, a crash when you examine the scar. Think of the plane like, skidding. And it was somehow related to the war because Piggy says that they were attacked, right? And so that would be an example of a level 1 question. And then going down, and pay attention, because the way that the boys are described throughout, their physical description, that direct characterization, has a lot to do with how things are deteriorating in the story. And so, moving on. Another good question for level 1 would be, is Piggy proud of the fact that, is he proud of his imperfections? You could say yes. The other characters are the ones that react to it, and that's why, you kind of have the attitude you do about Piggy. But right here gives you great proof that he is actually, quite proud. So one other question that I'm going to find. You can't have any of my questions. Got it? These are all mine. I am going to find the part about the conch. Where do they find it? Looking. Here. Ralph had stopped smiling and pointing into the lagoon. Something creamy lay among the ferny weeds. A stone? No, a shell. Suddenly, Piggy was a bubble with decorous excitement. So this is pretty interesting because if you think about it, ooh, decorous. He's not acting crazy though, because remember, decorous is like, very polite and together. So, just like any boy, he's excited to find shells. I mean, if you've ever been to the beach, like that's the best part about it. I mean, like that's the treasure that you find. And so a great level 1 question could be what Piggy says in regards to what to do with it. And so what you could write is, all right here. What does Piggy say they can use the conch for? Well, right here it is. So these are level 1 questions. I gave you an example of a level 2 question. I am going to come back and to make a second version of this. But if you have any questions about level 1, remember, go back to this document. I'm going to upload it and then reference, the examples that I gave to you in my presentation. I'll go ahead and load this as well and see if I can share it where you can see the comments. I want you to go to this, and then if you look at slides 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 through 9. So slides 2 through 9, it tells you exactly how many questions you need to come up with. And remember, you can do this with a partner. So 2 to 3 important pieces of information we learn. So you're going to identify 2 to 3 important pieces of information we learn. You can add that to the document I'm going to throw into Google Classroom. You're going to create 2 level 1 questions that ensure people have an understanding of this information. And then you need to provide your textual evidence, pages, your the quote, essentially. Make sure that you can back it up with the text. And then you need to make a connection for us. So why, you can't just choose anything. Why is this information essential, to the story? So the best example that I gave you would have been, both of my examples. If you think about the one about Piggy, having pride and, having his asthma, it goes to show the self-confidence and the belief in himself that he has. He's very, aware and kind of, has a firm understanding of his place in the world. The conch, it's not Ralph's idea, because when Ralph sees it, he thinks he's found a treasure. And even though Piggy is excited about it, his response to it is, we can use it to call a meeting. So keep that in mind. So you're going to do that for chapter 1. And make sure you read through all of these. Level 1 are knowledge questions. And chapter 2, you are going to do the exact same thing. Chapter 3, the exact same thing. And chapter 4, the exact same thing. And then make sure you bring that with you when I see you in class on Thursday or Friday, depending on which class you're in. And you can do chapters 1 through 4 with a friend, but for next week, if you want to work ahead, keep in mind that you're doing level 2 questions, and I think I may have you do those on your own. So let's go ahead and see how this week works, and then we can decide if we want to continue doing partner work or if I need you to branch out. Now, also, I need you guys to make sure you go and you look at my lesson plans, because I'll go ahead and link these into the assignment so you guys can kind of see this. But John Locke, if you can get a chance to kind of start reading that, that's great. We're going to try to get to that the next class period. If you've already received it, hopefully we can get to that, but taking the quizzes and the review may take some time. Double check the reading schedule. It's here linked. You can just click on that and kind of see where you need to be. The summative graded discussion, I'm going to go ahead and assign this. So the presentation that I gave you, that is going to be your prep for your graded discussion. So you need to reference the rubric in your presentation to ensure you know what is expected of you as the discussion progresses, so I'll show you that. You need to annotate. So what I would do is when you're writing your questions, I would use Post-its and maybe color code level 1, level 2, level 3 questions, like write which one they are. And you're going to put them on the document, but make sure you have them marked in your book. And so I'll try to go ahead and give you a presentation that talks a little more about annotation. It's the critical reading process. Harvard has a really good one-pager explaining it. And I can see if I can throw another presentation together where you see me applying it. So these are, you need to outside, okay, so considering what we've talked about in class, you prepared your questions with your partner, and then you are going to make 2 level 2 questions. So you have your level 2 questions and level 3 questions that you're going to be making in the other presentation. But you are going to create additional ones that are not going to be the same ones you came up with. And these are, when we're going through, you're going to pay attention to maybe other questions that people have, and, take notes during our class discussions, because your questions are going to come from something that we've already, talked about in class, or a new idea that you have. So read through this, and I will explain it again the next class period. So answering these, you're going to come up with level 3 topics. You will need to answer these to get to your level 3 questions. So your text to self, text to world, text to text. How does ideas in the novel apply to things outside the novel? That's what a level 3 is. And you are going to basically have one. Choose one of these. Choose one of these. For level 2, you're going to create at least 2 level 2 questions. And these are going to analyze, the character's actions, the authorial purpose, or whatnot. We'll have more information on level 2 and level 3. But for next class period, bring your level 1 questions, and I will see you in class.